And so it's it's impossible. It's not just difficult, it's impossible to be a 100% authentic Norse shaman because it doesn't exist. Hello, my name is Jacob Todson, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Odin. Today, I'm going to kind of address some questions that have come at me over these last few months and the last couple of years. So many of you may have been from this channel from the very beginning, or remember some of my earlier videos, or found your way here through my Norse Pagan content when I was making content, particularly about Scandinavian ancient religion and how it is being revived today, particularly in North America. And so this channel has gone through a lot of different changes over the years. And so obviously the content now is a bit different from that. So some people have begun to question whether or not I'm still a Norse pagan. And so I kind of wanted to have that conversation because it is very important. I hope you enjoy this conversation discussing my journey and where this content stands today and answering this question of, am I still a Norse pagan? The answer, quite simply, is I believe yes. I am not quite the same as when I started, which I think is true for anyone that should be on their spiritual journey. Is if you're the exact same person spiritually as you started a path, then you are years down the road. That's you have something to reflect on, because I don't think that's the point of spirituality at all, especially in our modern world. I still see everything in this Norse worldview. This is how I was introduced into paganism. And I think a lot of people get into Norse paganism, get into spirituality through the Norse lens, through the Scandinavian mythology. And I think this is because it's more easily accessible. I think of all of the ancient mythologies and religions I have explored, Norse paganism is actually the most accessible, and this is because the language is more understandable, the stories are more relatable, and they're more entertaining. Especially now as I research into the Celtic, as I research into the Irish is very hard to understand, the names are very hard to pronounce, and the stories are very, very difficult to understand and are often not as entertaining as the Norse. Now, I'm not saying that the Norse is superior, I'm just saying to an outside audience, the Norse is much more easy to absorb. And so I think as people get into spirituality and paganism, particularly in America, when they look at the ones that are available to them, really your options are Wicca or Norse paganism. And 100% Norse paganism has more of a tie to ancient history. And so I think if you're more inclined to the historical side of paganism, you're going to go with the Norse. And so I think that's why a lot of Americans get into Norse paganism in particular. Now, something I have noticed and learned from my travels is the fact that Norse paganism, as it survives in Scandinavia and as it's being revived in North America, are very different. That is something to acknowledge and something that I learned from my travels. And so this identity of Norse paganism is something I personally began to question as well. Like, what does this even mean? Because I don't think the people who worship Odin, who worship Thor, and Denmark and Sweden and Norway practice very similar at all to the people who practice in North America. And I think it's because it's impossible to practice exactly the same, simply because you're on different lands. You're not on the soil of Scandinavia. Of course, there's the question of, can you be a Norse pagan without being from Scandinavia? Or having a Scandinavian ancestry? And I believe the answer is still, yes, you can. You can still be a Norse pagan. But I do think there has to be a recognition that the Norse paganism that exists in the United States is very different than the Norse paganism that exists in Europe, and particularly in Scandinavia. And that's okay. And I think if you want to become closer to the Scandinavian vision of what this is, then you should travel to Scandinavia. I think you should go to each of the countries if possible. I know it's not always possible, but one of the big things in religion is a pilgrimage. And I think taking a pilgrimage to the place that you are saying that you are connecting to, the ancestors you say you're connecting to, I think that's very important. Ancestry is a very big part of paganism. It's not the most important part, and it's also not a limiting factor to the gods that you worship. If you want to worship Odin, anyone can worship Odin. But your ancestors are set in stone. It's the people that came before you. You can't change who your ancestors were. And so you can't deny that when you go to the land of your ancestors that you're going to feel a connection of some kind. And so I can't deny that when I went to Scandinavia, I didn't feel anything. And then when I went to Scotland, I did. And so, of course, the nature of this content was going to become a little bit more Scottish the more I had this connection. And so to follow your connection to your ancestors is only reaffirming your connection as what we believe, especially North America and Norse paganism is. It's just different in Scandinavia, because when you talk to someone from Scandinavia and you're like, who are your ancestors? And they're like, well, they're from here. So of course it's going to be different, because as an American, my ancestry is, Irish, Scottish, English, Germanic, possibly a bit of Danish, Native American, probably some weird Italian mixed in there, So My ancestry is much more complicated than someone that was born and raised in a traditional home in Scandinavia. And so the power bank of ancestors I have is just going to be very different than someone from the Scandinavian countries. And so for the people who are getting into Norse paganism in the United States, I think you're going to find something very similar on your path, and I think you should embrace that on your path. I've had people reach out to me and they say, oh, I'm scared to study the Celtic, study my Celtic heritage because I don't want to piss off the Norse gods. You won't. I guarantee you, you're actually only going to expand your connection to the Norse gods by exploring where your ancestors came from. All right, now what about some of you out there who are like, I don't really care about your personal path. What about the videos? Get back to the Norse pagan videos. Well, I do have good news for you. I'm bad news. So the next set of videos is going to be Irish based. And that's just because I'm feeling very called to go there. I've done a lot of research on the Norse. I've been to Scandinavia. I've made videos in Scandinavia that some people didn't watch anyways. So if you haven't, make sure you go back and check. I've made videos on Denmark, on Sweden, on Norway. So make sure you go back and check out those videos. But I'm just feeling called to go to Ireland to record about their spirituality, their beliefs, to interview people from there. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And then after that, I actually have a few videos scheduled to do in Scandinavia. I'm going back to Norway. I have a really great interview lined up with someone who practices Seidr magic. So I have a great video on Seidr coming up. I'm going to go back to Midgardsblot. I'm going to get some great interviews there, and I'm going to record a lot of my old Norse paganism videos. I'm going to re-record them in Scandinavia. And so I do have some Norse pagan content coming up for those people that began this channel and supported this channel through Norse paganism. I have some content for you coming, but I do hope you enjoy this Irish content as well. And just like I've been saying in this video, I think it could benefit you, even if you do want to fit into that box of Norse paganism. I think learning from the Irish, learning from their ancient practices and beliefs, I think those can benefit you even as a Norse pagan. So I do feel inclined to share a little bit more about shamanism as well, since this is something that I've talked about on this channel before. It's something I know a lot of people who watch this channel are interested in. So it's something that's very difficult to talk about, just because one, it's very hard to film at shamanic events, but it's been very hard to document that experience. It's also felt disingenuous to document that experience. And maybe partially it's because it's something you have to learn from in so many different groups. I've been to a Norse shamanism class. I've been to a workshop on Norse shamanism. And one of the main things talked about in that workshop is the fact that we know next to nothing about Norse shamanism, that we know very little about the shamanism that survived in Scandinavia. So by the very definition of researching and practicing Norse shamanism, you can't 100% be Scandinavian in origin, because you have to learn from the South American, from the Siberian, from the Finnish. And so it's it's impossible. It's not just difficult, it's impossible to be a 100% authentic Norse shaman, because it doesn't exist. We don't know what their shamanism looked like. We can guess, we can infer, we can learn from other traditions, but just by the definition of wanting to get interested into Norse shamanism, I had to expand my worldview to the South American, to the Siberian, and to learn from as many groups as I could in a respectful way, in order to continue to build this practice. I am not a shaman, I am not initiated, but obviously I do have shamanic techniques that I've learned. I've learned different methods of shamanic healing, and so that's what I do in my practices. That's what I do in my workshops and retreats. That's what I do with the Fellowship of Northern Traditions, is I offer what I have learned and the stuff that I feel comfortable doing, and I'm continuing to learn and continuing to seek new techniques and lessons until I find my way to a teacher, and that teacher will, take me on the path of initiation if I'm worthy of it. But I wanted to share that with you in this kind of in a more serious tone, because that's one of the reasons I've had to expand my worldview. It's one of the reasons that I've had to, to really open up past this definition of what Norse paganism is if I wanted to learn about the shamanism. And this is true of so many different things. As the moment you start looking into the very finite details of Norse mythology, of what we think Norse practices were, you find that there's very little information on the very specific stuff. And so if you want to learn about shape-shifting, if you want to learn about Seidr magic, if you want to learn about divination, if you want to learn about magic in general, you can't 100% look at a Norse source from it, because those 100% sources don't exist. Certain things like Odin, Thor, of basic worship, the very basics of heathenry, you can build a practice off of. You can somewhat know what they did during the holidays, but very little. And there's certain things that we can't do and we shouldn't do in our modern world that were talked about with the Scandinavians. You know, human sacrifice is something they historically did, and obviously we don't want to, and nor should we want to, continue these practices into today. It's something we evolved from. And I think that's a big thing here, is we're constantly evolving as a species, as a culture, and as a spirituality. And we today are an evolved version or a different version than the people that existed in the past. And we can honor their roots, we can honor where they came from, we can honor their lessons. But at the end of the day, the stories we know were written down by a Christian. And at the end of the day, the practices we do now, many of them are influenced by New Age practices, by different cultures' practices, and it's impossible to escape that, especially when it comes to Norse shamanism. There would be no Norse shamanism without global shamanism, without the South Americans, the Siberian, and the others that have influenced the studies of Norse shamanism today. This video was difficult to make because I knew no matter what words I said, I would upset or piss someone off. Because not everyone shares my worldview, not everyone shares my beliefs in Norse paganism, and that's perfectly okay. I don't believe I have the 100% truth. I don't believe I have 100% the right path. And that's because there's no such thing as 100% of anything in Norse paganism, as we're all wrong. There's no one person that is right. We're all wrong, no matter who you are. And it's because it's impossible to be right. It's impossible to know exactly what they did in the past. It's impossible to replicate exactly what they did in the past. And so we have to be okay with that. We have to be okay with being wrong. We have to be okay with not being right. And we have to be okay with getting along with one another despite not having all the answers. And so I don't believe I have all the answers, and I don't believe you have all the answers. But what I believe is that if we come together and we communicate and we respect one another, we'll come to more of the understanding of what the truth is, if there is a universal truth. There might not be a universal truth to this all. When it works, when paganism works, when Norse paganism works, when shamanism works, when spirituality and healing work, it is so beautiful and so amazing. If we could all just stop arguing with one another, if we could all stop trying to cut each other's throats and gatekeep each other from information, and we all just started trying to work together more, we would have a much better place. And we'll still never know 100% the truth, and that's perfectly okay. So I think that's the best way I can end this video. So thank you for listening to my ramblings, and it's okay if you don't agree with me, but I hope something I've said has inspired you in your own practice, no matter what it is. So am I still a Norse pagan? I believe so, but you're allowed to disagree with me. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video here at the Wisdom of Odin.